Hello everyone, welcome back to Valois Dark Arts for those seeking deeper meaning in the dark. It is Tuesday. As of right now, it is 1 a.m. I promised that I was going to get this out on Saturday, and then I pushed it back up to Sunday, and then Monday, and now we're looking at the early hours of Tuesday morning. I'm really sorry, you guys. It has been an absolutely hectic week and weekend, so you'll have to excuse me. This Mother's Day has been completely crazy. I was involved helping out at two different events here in the city, and basically one after another. We had the Austin Vampire Carnival, and then Vamp, basically one after the other. And I'm pretty active in the vampire community here in Austin, so I needed to be there, so that has just gotten in the way of everything. But all the same, we are continuing on our sort of journey down the rabbit hole here. What I'm going to do after finishing the spirit section is I thought I would go ahead and do a section on spell working. There's been some indication from some people that there wasn't really an open resource on, outside of books, sort of a practical primer on spellcasting. So this is going to be a very short, I would say another 3-part brief introduction to that. And what I really want to focus on this week for that is visualization. The big core of spell work is not only figuring out what you want, but being able to clearly see in your mind's eye what you want. So sort of one after another, not only figuring out what you want, but also sort of seeing it and starting to being able to manifest that in the energy is really what we're going to start with for this week. So figuring out what you want. This is something I've had it recommended by many of us psychologists, and then obviously if you have any sort of experience with esoteric work already, then you are familiar with the concept of the magical journal. The biggest suggestion I'm going to give to anybody who's interested in doing any kind of spell work is journaling. Especially when you're first starting out and you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Writing down, okay, I tried this and this spell on this date, and I had this result, however many weeks or months later that you actually get the result, is going to be extraordinarily helpful. On top of, a lot of times we're really vague on what we want. Depending on how specifically you're casting, having that pinned down is a big deal. Now, I don't necessarily advocate for casting in a specific direction unless you are absolutely certain that there's a strong possibility that's going to, see, my voice is cracking again like it was a few weeks ago. I'm sorry about that. Again, it's been a long weekend, but anyway, I wouldn't need to casting that way unless you're absolutely sure it's going to go in your favor. Now, but on the reverse end, if you do cast a really emotionally charged spell, and I've seen this from my own experience, there's also a high possibility it could happen. And that's what a lot of having that magical journal is going to be able to do, is if you are doing a lot of routine spell casting, you'll be able to identify that this and this and this works for me, and this and this and this doesn't work for me. As well as really figuring out what is it you actually want. So that's my first sort of little soapbox on that. The next part I want to talk about is actually cultivating the mind's eye. And that goes more into meditation, specifically sort of active guided meditation. If anyone is familiar with doing sort of guided meditations that actually give you the visuals where you're not exactly having to conjure things for yourself, those will be really useful in helping you sort of being able to see something with all 5 of your senses, because that is something that's going to help you a lot when you're doing this kind of work, and being able to conjure it exactly what it is that you want. Because you not only have to see it, you have to feel it, you have to taste it, you have to smell it, you have to engage all of your senses and all of your emotions in the practice of spellcasting, or it's going to be really, really hard for you to manifest. So active meditations are going to be some of your best friends. Now, another thing, a lot of beginner books end up mentioning this, is elemental work. Being able to become more aware of your energy and actually perceive elemental energy, either in your mind's eye or physically. And that's going to segue a little bit more into the actual energy of a spell, which we can definitely go into that in next week's episode. But there is a bit of an overlap there. If you're not ready to do the full-on energy work with the elemental energy, a good way you can start in building your visualization to do a sort of casting a spell is going through all 4 of the elements and making sure you can fully visualize these things. Whether you're sort of conjuring fire, or conjuring earth, or conjuring air, it's a very common exercise, and what a lot of writers tend to encourage, a lot of teachers as well tend to encourage, is you physically getting yourself into those elements and then sort of bringing it back with you. So sitting in front of a bonfire and then being able to visualize fire, and sticking your feet in a creek and then being able to do the same with water, and so on and so forth. That's a good place to start if you're absolutely unable. And what I would recommend is starting with the elemental meditations and then going up into the active sort of guided meditations, because you kind of have to be able to crawl before you can walk. And if you're having trouble with the visualizations and you're not able to do, basic 4 elements, you're going to have a hard time sort of conjuring a full sort of landscape in your mind. Now, this usually doesn't get brought up in any sort of recommendations from books or sort of conventional teachers. But if you're having a hard time actually seeing things in your mind's eye for this kind of thing, pick up a good fiction novel. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but the more you can learn how to flex those imagination muscles, the more successful your spell casting is going to be. The more vivid that kind of inner world is going to be. As a matter of fact, if that inner world of yours is lacking, there's a really good beginner book that I used. I was a little bit further along in my journey, but it was a very intensive little course called The Inner Temple of Witchcraft by Christopher Penczak, who's a very well-respected leader, specifically in neo-pagan circles. And I went through that entire book and did things basically step by step as he recommended. And that was one of the most valuable sort of instructional courses I took outside of my teachers and my own solitary study, as far as being able to actually practice magic successfully. So that's something I would recommend if you feel like you're lacking in sort of the inner world to begin. That Penczak's book is really good and sort of laying that groundwork for you. There is a sort of Wiccan bias in that, but if you can get past that in that book, it would be extraordinarily helpful. Let me see if there's another book I can think of off the top of my head that would be good. A lot of ceremonial magic has sort of the basics of that kind of visualization in their introductory rituals. So if you're comfortable with a sort of Judeo-Christian background of that, starting with something like the Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram, is going to be very, very helpful. Or, let's see, what was that other one? Like the Ritual of the Headless One, I believe it was called, is another similar kind of ceremonial magic rite. I believe is what that was called. And then, of course, you have like the Thelemic Star Ruby, which goes back to the Lesser Banishing Ritual, the Pentagram. I mean, you do have these foundational rituals, and that are really helpful. I mean, if you really, really, really want to go basic, you have the basic sort of circle invocation in Wicca that really does serve as a foundation point for later things that you can do for yourself when it comes to basic spellcasting. It's giving you the sort of spiritual legs that you need to be able to do the kind of work. Now, there are people who would argue, say more in chaos magic circles and things of that nature, is that it's less about the spiritual element and more about being able to program your brain. If you want to try that approach, sort of more focusing on sigil work and things like that, I can do an entire section on that. But we're talking about sort of getting the feet under you so you can do all kinds of spellcasting, not necessarily be restricted to sigil work or candle work or whatever kind of spellcasting you want. This is my recommendation, to be able to have that kind of flexibility. So, to sort of recap, starting with the journal, the magical journal, to not only determine what it is you want or what it is you need, and 2, being able to document your spiritual and spell work and figure out what works and what doesn't. There's very much a scientific method to the madness here. I'm guilty of not necessarily recording all of the spell work I do, but I'm pretty good about keeping track of, okay, I did this spell for this, and this is what happened, that kind of a thing. Especially when they're kind of back to back to each other. Or I'm in communication with one of my mentors about it, that kind of a thing. There's definitely a discussion going on about that. So if you don't journal, at least keeping some kind of track of it. But again, I highly, highly, highly recommend the journaling. The most prominent practitioners have always done that. I mean, there's a big thing about Gerald Gardner's original Book of Shadows, and then Aleister Crowley had journals upon journals upon journals. I mean, this is a very well-established, very successful method as far as getting started in this kind of work. And then talking about elemental meditations and then active meditations as a way of bringing in that visual element. And again, I'm saying visual, but it's not just visual. It is being able to perceive the world within your mind with all of your senses. Starting with the sight, and then the sound, and then the taste, and the tactile. When you're able to do that, sort of spell casting for what you want becomes monumentally easier. Like I said, the more successful my workings have been those things that I've been able to concentrate that solely on. So kind of an awkward episode here. Like I said, we're running really, really late, but that's a subject I wanted to get us started on, was the spell casting. So I do hope this is helpful for everybody. This is not my most intellectual or sourced episode, but I will put a link in the description to Christopher Penczak's book, and then I can probably put a link. I'll also put a link to all of the rituals I referenced as sort of beginner points to sort of help, give you guys training wheels to get started if those are things you're interested in. Again, these are attached to specific paths, so it kind of depends on what you're interested in pursuing. And then I'll even link some things about the sort of more chaos magic approach to it as well, if you're just not interested in a theistic route at all. So to give you guys something to choose from. And then there is a wonderful book. I will link that in the description as well. specifically, I almost bought it, that talks about Aleister Crowley's extensive journaling, and there are a couple other books there about magical journaling that I can definitely reference as well that can be extremely helpful for you guys. So I'm hoping that should give you guys a good start on basic spell work. So the game part 2 and 3 will be the calling forth of the energies that you need and the tools that you need, or you might need, depending on what you're trying to do and how you want to do it, to actually do the spell you want. And then part 3 will more than likely be the actual act of casting. But I really wanted to start with our foundations here and start with visualization. So I'm hoping you all enjoyed that episode. I do apologize that this is super, super late, but things should be evening out again. But you will always get your episode within the week. I promise. I want to go back to our usual Saturday schedule, so shouldn't have any problems with that again, I hope. If so, I'll keep you guys posted on the Facebook page. But otherwise, Nira de Valois out. I'll see y'all next week.